Two Japanese fathers are now 40 years old. One is financially struggling, while the other has built substantial wealth. But 20 years ago, things looked very different. They were both in their 20s. They had both just started working, they were both earning their first real income, and they both wanted pretty much the same thing: a secure future for themselves and their families. So how did they end up in such different financial situations? Was one of them simply smarter? Did one earn much more money? Or did one get lucky with an investment? Not really. The real difference started with a few financial decisions they made along the way. And to understand what happened, let's go back 20 years to when they were both just starting their working lives. At that time, getting a regular paycheck felt like a completely new kind of freedom. For the first father, that paycheck meant he could finally afford some of the things he had wanted for a long time. Maybe a better phone, better clothes, more dinners outside, more entertainment, and eventually a nicer apartment. And honestly, none of that sounds unreasonable. He was working hard, so why shouldn't he enjoy his money? The problem wasn't one big purchase, it was the pattern. Every time his income came in, a large part of it was already available to spend. And as his income increased, his lifestyle slowly increased with it. The second father looked at his first paycheck in a different way. He still wanted to enjoy his money. He still bought things he liked. But before spending everything, he decided that part of his income needed to have a different purpose. Some money would pay for his life today. Some would stay available for emergencies. And some would be kept for his future. It didn't feel like a huge decision at the time. In fact, the difference between the two men was almost impossible to see. They were both working, they were both spending, they were both living normal lives. But one of them had started building something the other hadn't: financial flexibility. And that became much more important as the years went by. A few years later, both men had managed to build some savings. Now the first father looked at his bank balance and felt reassured. His thinking was simple. If my money is sitting safely in the bank, I know where it is. That's security. And there's nothing wrong with that idea. Having accessible cash is important. Emergencies happen. Unexpected expenses come up. Money you might need soon should not be exposed to unnecessary risk. But the second father started asking a different question. What about the money I probably won't need for many years? He wasn't interested in gambling with his savings, and he wasn't trying to become rich overnight. He simply started learning about long-term investing. And this is where an important distinction appeared. He wasn't saying, don't keep money in the bank. He was saying, keep enough cash for security, but long-term money can have another job. Because cash and assets serve different purposes. Cash provides security. Assets can build wealth. That distinction is especially interesting when we look at Japan. For decades, Japanese households have kept a very large share of their financial wealth in cash and bank deposits. In fact, even at the end of 2025, roughly half of Japanese household financial assets were still held in currency and deposits. So this isn't a story about Japanese people simply abandoning savings and putting everything into the stock market. Quite the opposite. Japan has traditionally been very savings-oriented. But things are changing. Japan has been encouraging households to think more seriously about putting some long-term money to work, and one of the biggest examples is NISA, a tax-advantaged investment framework designed to encourage long-term investing. And the idea behind it is actually pretty simple. You don't have to treat every yen the same way. Money you might need for an emergency can stay accessible. Money you'll need in the near future can remain relatively safe. But money you don't expect to need for many years can potentially be invested for long-term growth. The second father starts doing exactly that. He keeps his emergency savings. But alongside those savings, he begins building long-term investments. The first father keeps building his cash balance. The second father keeps his safety net, but he also starts building productive assets. At this point, neither man knows how this will turn out, and honestly, the difference still doesn't look very impressive. But that's the thing about financial decisions. Their impact usually isn't obvious at the beginning. It becomes obvious much later. A few more years pass, And now they're entering their 30s. Their careers are moving forward. Their incomes are increasing. And then they both face another major decision: buying a home. The first father finds a property he really likes. It's bigger. It's newer. It's in a better location. And technically, he can afford the monthly payment. So he buys it. At first, it feels like a major achievement. He's finally moving into a home that represents the success he's worked for. But there's another side to that decision. The larger home means a larger mortgage. The larger mortgage means larger monthly payments. Then come the maintenance costs, utilities, insurance, and everything else that comes with owning a more expensive property. Suddenly, a large part of his future income is already committed. His salary goes up, but so do his obligations. The second father also wants a home. Of course he does. But before making the decision, he asks himself a different question. Not, how much house can I afford? Instead, he asks, how much financial flexibility do I want to keep? So he chooses a home that fits his needs without stretching his finances to the limit. It may not be the biggest house in the neighborhood. It may not be the most impressive, but it leaves room for the rest of his financial plan. And that difference matters. Because the cost of a major financial decision isn't only the money you pay for it, it's also what that decision prevents you from doing afterward. A larger mortgage can mean less money available for investing. It can mean less money available for emergencies. It can make changing jobs more difficult. And it can reduce your ability to take advantage of opportunities when they appear. The second father understands something that is easy to overlook. When you're making a major financial decision, don't just ask what you can afford today. Ask what that decision will allow you to do tomorrow. And now, both men are getting closer to 40. Their incomes are higher than ever. This should be the point where both of them become significantly wealthier. And in one sense, they do. But then something interesting happens. The first father's lifestyle starts growing along with his income. He gets a better car. He takes more expensive holidays. He eats at more expensive restaurants. He upgrades his phone. He adds more subscriptions. Maybe he moves into an even nicer home. And none of these decisions seem crazy on their own. But together, they create a pattern. Every time his income goes up, his idea of a normal lifestyle goes up with it. He earns more, so he spends more. And because he spends more, he needs to keep earning more. His income is growing, but his financial freedom isn't growing at the same speed. The second father also receives salary increases, and he enjoys some of that extra money too. He's not living like a monk, and he's not trying to avoid spending forever. The difference is that he doesn't automatically turn every raise into a permanent new expense. Instead, a portion of each increase goes toward his long-term financial goals. Some goes into investments. Some strengthens his financial reserves. And over time, his assets begin growing alongside his income. Now the two financial systems look completely different. For the first father, higher income often leads to a higher lifestyle, which leads to higher expenses. For the second father, higher income creates an opportunity to build more capital, which can then become more assets. And this is where time starts doing the heavy lifting. The investments he started years ago have had time to grow. The savings he protected are still available, and the assets he accumulated have become part of his financial foundation. Now let's go back to where we started. They're both 40 years old. Both have worked for roughly 20 years. Both have earned money. Both have faced difficult years. And both have made mistakes. But their financial lives now look very different. The first father has a respectable income, but much of that income is already committed. His lifestyle is expensive, his major financial obligations are large, and most of his future financial security still depends heavily on his ability to keep working and earning. The second father isn't necessarily living an extravagant life. He doesn't need a mansion. He doesn't need a luxury car. What he has built is something much more valuable: financial flexibility. He has accessible savings, he has long-term investments, he has accumulated assets, and his financial future is no longer completely dependent on his next paycheck. So what actually made the difference? It wasn't one magical investment. It wasn't one huge salary. And it wasn't because one man never made a mistake. The first father wasn't necessarily irresponsible, and the second father wasn't necessarily perfect. They simply made different choices when their money gave them different opportunities. When they received their first serious income, one saw more spending power, while the other saw an opportunity to start building capital. When their savings grew, one focused mainly on keeping his money safe, while the other separated emergency savings from long-term money that could potentially grow. When they bought a home, one focused on what he could afford at that moment, while the other thought about how the decision would affect his financial flexibility for years to come. And when their incomes increased, one upgraded his lifestyle, while the other used part of that additional income to build more assets. None of these decisions would completely change someone's life in a single year. That's the important part. You probably wouldn't look at either man after 1 year and say, wow, this person is going to be wealthy. But repeat the same type of decisions for 5 years, then 10 years, then 20 years, and suddenly the difference can become enormous. And that's what Money Decoded wants you to notice. This isn't about saying that every Japanese person manages money in exactly the same way. It isn't about saying that Japan has discovered some secret formula for becoming rich. Japan itself remains heavily savings-oriented, while its financial system is also encouraging more long-term investment through initiatives such as NISA. The bigger lesson is universal. Cash can provide security. Assets can create the opportunity for growth. And some of the most important financial decisions are made long before we can see their results. What do you do with your first serious income? What do you do with your savings? What happens when you can suddenly afford a bigger lifestyle? And what do you do every time your income increases? Because these decisions don't happen just once. They repeat. And when a decision is repeated for 20 years, it stops being just a decision. It becomes a system, and eventually, that system can determine where you end up. Wealth isn't usually built in one big moment. It's built in the decisions you repeat. This is Money Decoded. See you in the next one.